Welcome to the NC Choices webinar series, Teaching Tools for Beginning Farmers, funded by the United States Department of Agriculture's Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program. I am Matt LaRue, Agricultural Marketing Specialist for Cornell Cooperative Extension, and I'm going to present the module on Marketing and Pricing. This is one of 7 modules offered in this webinar series. In this presentation, we'll talk about marketing channels and pricing. If you're interested in other resources offered by NC Choices, you can find out more on our website or on our YouTube channel. This is part 4 of Profitable Meat Marketing, where we'll discuss market channels and meat pricing. In this section, we really need to identify the farm's desired profit per head to determine the pricing needed to reach that goal in every channel that the farm sells meat in, to determine which channels are viable based on the pricing that we need in order to reach our goals, and then to learn how we can use price to aid inventory management. I want to start with talking about some observations that I made of prices up here in New York State where I live. What I saw was that I felt overall the freezer trade prices, which is to say prices for meat sold in bulk, like quarters, halves, and whole animals, seemed too low here in our market. So you can see the average prices that were observed here. For example, the beef price of $4.10 a pound, hanging weight, including processing, came from an average of 104 farms, and so on. So I wanted to create a tool and some teaching to support price development in order that farms might command higher prices. And here are some additional price observations looking at prices at farmers markets in the Ithaca, New York area. Also observed that prices seem to be relatively low, even compared to a natural beef product that's in a local grocery store. So the Wegmans price that's shown there, Wegmans is a grocery store chain, and this is their price for the Food You Feel Good About brand. Whenever there's an asterisk, it's Food You Feel Good About brand, which is a New York State raised, all natural program where the animals don't have any antibiotics or hormone implants, but are finished on a grain diet. And for this, Wegmans is sourcing this beef from 3 larger feedlots in the state and then putting them in their grocery stores. And so the question that we must ask is, what's the probability that our local farms that are selling at farmers markets are able to deliver their product to market more efficiently than a large grocery store buying from feedlots? Of course, the answer is it's not very probable that that could be done. And so we have prices that are probably not delivering profit to the farm. And you can just see some of these examples of the low price. Another thing that's sort of funny about these prices that we see at the farmers market is that we have surveyed 200 consumers and asked them if they buy local meat, and if not, why they aren't buying it. And the main reason cited was that they perceive that local meat is too expensive. Now, granted, the Food You Feel Good About line that we're comparing prices to is more of a premium or a higher priced product than, say, a commodity or a conventionally produced product. But still, it's commanding a higher price than the farmers markets. So there's definitely room for farms to respond with better pricing. To start the pricing discussion, the farm first needs to evaluate their income goals. They should determine how much they wish to retain, which is to say profit, and then what gross is needed to realize that. So questions that the farm managers would need to first discuss are, on an annual basis, how much do we need to gross? And then of that gross, how much do we wish to retain as profit? Or you could work the other way and think about how much do we wish to retain, just to say our profit, and then how much do we need to gross in order to realize that? You can then take this number that you've developed as an annual income goal, and you could spread it across the species that you raise if you're a multi-species farm, and then get right down to the number of head that you'll be harvesting and come up with a per head gross that's needed. Once you can come up with these numbers, you can use them to create monthly sales projections and write specific marketing objectives. Marketing objectives were introduced in the part 3 of this series. I just want to introduce to you the different marketing channels that are available for meat sales. And I've divided those channels up as those that take meat by the carcass and those that take meat by the cut. So you can see, the different channels that you're familiar with. You may have a regional branded program or a co-op brand that's buying whole animals, so they're buying by the carcass. There are perhaps restaurants and butcher shops and grocery stores that will still buy in as sides or whole animals. And then you have freezer trade customers, which are direct to consumer sales, where they're buying a half or a quarter or a whole animal, and really you're still selling the meat by the carcass. You're not selling cuts at that point. In the by the cut channels, you can see the very common channels such as farmers market, your own farm store, which may consist just of a freezer in your barn, and then those retail stores and restaurants that are ordering meat by the cut, some other channels as well. In this discussion of channels, we have to consider the price that we're receiving in any given channel and how that interacts with the amount of marketing skill and labor that's required in order to sell in that channel. So I have ranked the channels by increasing price, but also increasing marketing labor, meaning that in the farmers market channel, which is where you sell meat by the cut and you pay a processor, you're receiving the highest price per pound, probably of any of these channels. However, you're also needing to put in the highest amount of effort to realize those prices. And we can look down at the other channels. When I say that there are whole carcass channels with no processing, I mean that the farm does not need to be involved in arranging processing. So co-op brands and regional brands and commodity beef sales or pork sales, the farm is really just shipping animals, selling by the carcass, and not involved in processing. And then there are some channels that are in between where we're still selling by the carcass, but we're needing to make our own arrangements for processing. So those channels that offer the highest prices are not necessarily the highest profiting channels, because we have to put a value on our time and put that into the equation. The highest pricing channels are time intensive, they take marketing skill, and therefore they bring more cost for that high price received. So we're going to go further in with pricing, and we're going to think about the conditions that we have for this situation. Each market channel that we sell in has its own unique set of costs. Each cut of meat that we have to sell comes in a certain proportion on a carcass. And then each cut has a level of demand, in other words, of consumer demand in the channel that we're pricing for. So that may vary across channels, but there's a certain level of consumer demand for each cut in each channel that we sell in. Because of these conditions, we really need to develop unique pricing for each channel that we sell in. In fact, why should we expect a different level of profit from the different channels that we can sell in? People often talk about the different channels in terms of their profitability, and they might say something like, I can profit more per head in channel X or channel Y. But why would the farm expect a different level of profit from the different channels? We can create a scenario where we fix the cost of processing and production and profit per head so that it's uniform across all channels, and then look and find that the only real variable cost in these channels is our marketing labor. So I've created a hypothetical set of numbers here where we're selling meat by the cut in the farmer's market, we're selling it to restaurants by the cut, or we're selling freezer trade direct to consumer by the quarter. And look across all channels. Of course, our cost of production remains the same. We raise animals the same regardless of where they're going. We're going to pay a processor in each instance, and our processing costs remain fixed across all channels. because even though we're not selling cuts of meat in the freezer trade, the meat is still being cut, fully cut and packaged. Then we introduce our desired profit per head, just a hypothetical number of $300 per head. We want to receive that regardless of which channel we're selling in. And then finally, the real variable that we need to account for is the amount of time and skill that we need to put in each channel in order to realize those sales. So our marketing labor cost varies from channel to channel. I estimated that it would take $960 worth of my time to sell all the meat from one animal at the farmer's market. And I thought, well, it'll take me half that amount of time to sell it to restaurants because I have a minimum order size and I can make deliveries and cut my time way down compared to the farmer's market. And finally, I have my freezer trade customers who are going to wind up buying a whole animal from me when I get four customers lined up. And some of them might even be repeat customers, and it would take even less time than what I've tried to capture here with my $240 cost. So you can see that the amount that we gross per head is variable across these channels when we account for everything, but our profit per head is going to be the same. And this is just a different way to start thinking about pricing. When we think about our farm, it's actually multiple businesses, and each business must profit. So look at this diagram and just think about how if your farm has a breeding herd, whether it's sows or ewes or cows, you've got a breeding herd, and the product that you have to sell from a breeding herd is feeders. So you can sell feeders out into the marketplace because there is a price offered in the greater market for feeders. Another thing that's an opportunity here is that you could be buying feeders into the farm, and perhaps you can buy feeders for less than you can produce them for. That bears some work on the farm to figure out what's the best opportunity here. Should I be retaining my feeders? Should I be selling them, or should I be buying feeders in? In any case, the next business on your farm is the feeding and finishing operation, which takes feeder animals and brings them up to a slaughter-ready weight. So that product that it has to sell is the finished or slaughter-ready animal. And that's where I'm going to say that your production ends when the animal is ready for harvest, and you, in fact, sell that animal to your marketing business. So again, there's an opportunity here to sell that animal into other channels where you're not going to be doing any marketing, or to keep it and add it down the line. But there's a logic that says if we're going to continue to retain an animal from birth to slaughter and then sell the meat ourselves, we're actually adding costs to that, and we're increasing our risk of a financial loss. Meaning, if a calf dies 2 days after it's born, there is a financial loss for the farm, but that loss is much greater if all the meat from one animal is in a freezer and then the freezer gets unplugged and the meat goes bad, right? That's a greater loss. So we know we've added value, of course, but we've also added cost, and thus we've increased our risk. So really, we need to justify the decision to continue down this chain of adding cost and increasing risk. And that sort of reward for doing this should be the payoff. So when we think about the farm business, it's useful to think about the prices that we're selling these different products to ourselves at. And we need a competitive price in order to justify continuing down the line. So in preparing to use the Cornell Meat Price and Yield Calculator, it's a tool that I've developed and that we're using in North Carolina. We're going to do some introduction of some of the logic, which we just did, and then some of the numbers that you need to prepare in order to use the tool successfully. So in preparation, we're first going to look at our production business and answer the question, what is my break-even cost of production? This is the number that I need for selling that finished slaughter-ready animal to my marketing business. I have a break-even cost of production, which in my example will be $1,300 per animal or per head. And then I don't want to run my production farm strictly as a break-even, so I'm also going to add profit to that production business. And the question is, how much profit would I like my production business to make per head? And for this, I'm going to use a hypothetical $100 per head. So when I sell this animal to my marketing business, I need to receive $1,400 per head in order for the production business to be in good shape. Next, we're going to look at the processing and marketing side, and we're going to add additional costs like the value of the time that I spend selling. And I've come up with this $600 per head as an example. If it takes me 5 farmers markets at 8 hours each, and I pay myself $15 an hour, that's $600 of time in order to sell all the meat from one animal. That means I'm selling roughly 80 pounds of meat per market. So of course, if I'm selling meat at a lower rate than that, then the cost will be higher. In addition to covering the cost of my time spent marketing and selling, then I also need to think about what is the profit above that cost. And this is where, in my mind, the big payoff comes for getting involved in all of this marketing. So I'm going to say that I would like to profit above marketing cost by another $500 per head. You can create your own numbers, and these are hypothetical numbers used to illustrate the tool and this example, but they're not based on research. So we've done an introduction to some of the logic and the sort of way of thinking about pricing, and now we're going to do the demonstration of the calculator tool. Anyone can use the tool at this web address. It's free, and we'll click on it and start doing a demonstration. So now we're going to go through an example using the Cornell meat price and yield calculator. This is a free online tool that's available to everyone, and I'm just going to do demonstration of how it works and we introduce some of the logic behind pricing with our slides, and now we're going to do this demonstration. So first, it's going to give some description that we've given in our slides about the structure, sort of the multiple businesses on the farm, and some of the thoughts to take into consideration in terms of valuing your time and paying each of your businesses enough for them to profit and thrive. As we use the tool, we're going to progress across these dots at the bottom, and when we reach the final dot, that means that we're all set with our pricing. So we're going to do an example for pricing meat by the cut for farmers markets. You can also use the tool to price carcasses, such as for freezer trade or for other customers that buy by the carcass. But the more complicated and informative demonstration would be to do the cuts. So on the first page, it's going to ask you which channel you're pricing for and which species of animal. And we're going to do farmers market, so we'll just click on this dot. And you can see in the upper right-hand corner that the calculator is always going to remind you what you're working on, because hopefully you're going to develop a set of prices for each channel that you sell in. And once we select our channel, it'll include that up there as well. And this asks, are you creating prices for individual cuts or for carcasses? Since we're doing the farmer's market, we'll say it's for cuts. And then they ask which species, and we'll say beef. So you can go to the next page now. And like I said, up here in the right-hand corner, it's remind you you're pricing beef cuts for farmers markets right now. And if you had multiple farmers markets and they in turn had different levels of cost, including the time that you spend traveling to them or selling at them, then you would want to actually come up with different prices for each farmer's market. This won't give you that level of detail up here, but it will tell you that you're working on beef cuts for farmers markets. So the first question that we need to ask that we discussed previously is the cost of production. And no, this tool does not help you figure out your cost of production. You do need to start with an accurate number. But for our example, I had said that we would use $1,300 as a break even for our production business. So $1,300 per head is our cost of production. But now above that break even cost, we'd like to have some profit. We can do the profit as a percentage of the 1,300 that we just entered, or we can say that we want to get a flat profit per head. And I'm going to use that version, and I'm going to say $100. So I'm not putting a massive emphasis on profit with my production business, and I'm just looking to get $100 per head. There is a link here that will take you to current market prices. I guess the logic for putting that in there was in the event that you have no idea what the cost of production is on your farm, at the very least you could find out what the sort of commodity rate is for finished beef, and then use that as some kind of a basis to start with your pricing. But again, that is not the best way to start. Also, I should say that it's not just beef. There's reports on this link for pork and for lamb also. So we're going to hit the next button and progress to the next little dot here. Next, because we know we can capture these costs very easily without too much record keeping needed, we can say what our trucking cost is per head. If you need help doing that, there's a helper calculator that pops up. How many head did you truck to the processor? And I'll say, for my example, oh, I brought 4 animals that day. What was your total cost in fuel and so on? So I'll say it cost me $100 in gas, and it took me 4 hours. And then a good hourly rate for my time is $15. So it calculates for you that your trucking cost per head was $40. This is just sort of a basic tool to give you an idea of what this is costing you. But for my example today, I'm going to use 35. And then the next question is, you have to go and pick that meat up from the processor and, capture the same value. So I'm going to say that it's the same cost per head as trucking the animals to the processor. So I'm going to say $35 per head in both of these and hit the next button. Okay, next is going to ask me about my processing costs. So we have to base those off the hanging weight or the carcass weight. So it asks you to enter the carcass weight. This would be for one representative animal that you're keeping track of, or if you already keep a lot of very detailed records about the weights of all of the cuts that come back, you could enter an average and then continue using an average throughout the tool. But I think it's going to probably be more realistic for most farms to choose one animal and then keep track of its carcass weight and its all the cuts received from it. Next, we pay a slaughter fee or a kill fee, and that's fixed per head. So we're going to say that was $85 per head, and then we pay a cut and wrap for the regardless of the channel, but in this case, farmers market. So the slaughterhouse is charging me 85 cents a pound cut and wrap based on the carcass weight. And of course, don't forget to enter that decimal because you get quite different results if you just type 85. Now at this stage, you can elect to enter the costs of additional processing, such as we could say patties were being made and the processor charged us an additional 35 cents a pound for patty making. And then later on in this process, we'll enter how many pounds were turned into patties. That's built in there, and you can add other products that had additional processing. But for today's demonstration, I'm going to keep it simple and just say no. We do not have any additional processing being done. Go to the next page. And it's going to ask for the cuts, all the cuts that were received from this animal, anything that's sellable from that carcass, basically, including bones for stock and so on. You're going to want to enter the name of the cut and then how many pounds. And it's not important to use any naming convention. You don't have to stick by any rules. You can name it Johnny's Special Steak if you want, just as long as you know what the cut is and you have the weights. So you'll have to type them in fresh with each use. Fortunately, my browser remembers what I've typed in here in the past, so I can get away with some double clicking. But ordinarily, you'd be typing all of this in, and that's one reason to have all of your work prepared before you sit down to use the tool. It'll just make your life easier, and you can replicate your results and adjust numbers more easily. So here, these are this is all going to be hypothetical or sort of made up weights, but we'll say that I've entered all the cuts from this animal. Now I'm going to enter how many pounds I received back. Some processors nowadays do provide this information for you, but there's always the kitchen counter method, which is to bring it all home and start weighing it out. So now I've got all my weights entered and all my cuts, and I can proceed to the next page. So what it's going to give us at this point is a little summary of everything that we've entered so far. Out of that carcass weight, the total weight of sellable meat turned out to be 389.5 pounds, which is a 64% carcass to retail yield. You can sort of skip over this base price reference, but you can see that our carcass value is $1,400. That's the $1,300 cost of production plus $100 profit for the production business. Our trucking was the $35 and $35 per head. And then we have the kill fee that we paid and the processing cost. So in essence, when we have that meat, we go to pick it up from the processor, we get back to the farm, we have spent $2,070 so far on production and transportation and processing. We haven't added any marketing costs yet. So we can have the meat back at the farm, but we haven't started to sell. So that's where this next couple of entries comes in. It's going to ask you to consider what your marketing costs are. We put it basically just in terms of labor, but if you know of other marketing costs, you're welcome to add them in. We can do it as a percent of the 2,069 up here, or as a flat per head. And I've really come around to thinking about doing it as a flat per head number these days. Certainly you could use either. So I'm going to say that I think it's going to take me 40 hours at farmer's market to sell all of the meat from one head. And I want to pay myself $15 an hour. So I'm going to enter a labor or a marketing cost of $600 per head. And you could do a simple tracking of sales and of time and come up with your own reasonable estimate. And then I'm going to add a profit to this time. And so in the slides earlier, when I was talking about increasing costs and adding costs and increasing risks, I said there has to be a big payoff to make all of this worth doing. And to me, that payoff is coming right now here in the marketing profit. What is this value that I've added by taking on this risk and adding these costs and investing this time? And I want that to be really a big reward. So I don't have research to inform what this number should be, but I'm going to use $500 per head as my payoff for all this extra work. So in essence, we've just added $1,100 of cost to this animal by taking it to the farmer's market to sell. So now what the tool does is test your current pricing. If you're already selling at the farmer's market, then you'd want to see how your current pricing holds up against your stated goals, which is really what we've been working on, our costs and then the goals for profit above that. So you can put your pricing to the test and see if it's delivering. If you're developing a price for the very first time, then you could just go and enter $1 a pound for everything. Of course, it's going to say that you fall short of your goals, but on some of the tabs that are coming up, you have the chance to revise pricing. So I prefer to see people who are developing the price for the very first time enter all ones for all of these prices. But we'll say for this example, in this demonstration, that we already have pricing and we'll start to enter what our current prices are. So that's just going to take me a moment. We've got all our prices put in and we can hit the next button and go to the next page. All right, so what the tool has done now is give us another summary. It says that the weighted average price, that is the weighted average price across all cuts, is $6.75 a pound. That's retail. Our total income from when we sell all of this meat and it's all gone is $2,630. So we can guess that we are falling short of our goal, and then it shows that indeed we're falling short by $538 per head. So it's important to know that this falling short of the goal, it's a stated goal that includes profit. It's not a literal calculation of if your farm is losing money with every animal, but it is saying that you're falling short of your profit goals. So we can go to the next page in order to revise our prices. And this is the kind of the most fun and maybe the most interesting page on the tool. All this previous pages were us doing the work that was necessary to get to this page. So we have a red light that says that we're falling short of our goal, and the goal here is to adjust prices until we get a green light, which means you're good to go and you're realizing your goal. And it also is showing you right here how much you're short of the goal by. It shows you how many pounds you have of each cut and then what your current price is. So then you have this window to revise prices. And we can think about something like maybe the fillet, where we have 6.5 pounds. We could raise that price, but since there's only 6.5 pounds, even a really big price increase, like going from $15 to $25, isn't going to get us out of the red because there's so few pounds. So probably when we begin to change prices, we want to look at some of the heavier cuts. Like here we have 188 pounds of ground beef. So we can raise that by $1.50, and we're getting closer. We're still short of our goal, but we're getting closer. And then we can continue to pick some other prices to adjust. So let me see what other prices I'm changing it here. Oh, okay. I'm going to change my sirloin steak to 11, my brisket to 8. And you see we're whittling down that shortage. Short ribs were really popular for a time, and they still sort of are, so I'm going to raise that price. Oh, and of course, ribeye steaks. We're going to raise the ribeye price to 19. And that puts us in the green, and actually with a few extra dollars, which is no big deal. So what we know now is that we could take these new revised prices to market, and we would be reaching all of our profit goals. But that's not where the work stops on this page. This is now an opportunity, once you've got this green light, to start thinking about which are the cuts that are always selling out very quickly, and then which are the cuts that we're always left with, the sort of last dregs of any given carcass that are filling up our freezers. There's some opportunity to use pricing here as a tool to make cuts sell in proportion to their yields from a carcass. In other words, it just so happens that the chuck and the round are probably the less desirable cuts. However, they come in really large proportions. So sometimes there's opportunity to maybe lower the prices in order to help those things move more quickly, and then to increase even higher some of the very fast selling cuts, the ones that you're very quick to sell out of. In essence, by raising those other prices, you'll slow down the consumer demand and maybe get them looking at some of your less expensive cuts. Again, trying to use, to the degree possible, price as a mechanism to make cuts sell in proportion to their yield, so that we're not always selling out of one thing and stockpiling another. And I think that's the opportunity here, in addition to making sure that we receive the amount of money needed to justify our participation in this channel, but also to look at selling cuts at a more even rate. But now that we've got our green light, we can go to the next page. We're going to get a new summary, and it's going to compare our old pricing to our new pricing. We've raised the weighted average price up to $8.16 a pound. Again, retail. Our total income when all the meat is sold will now be $3,176, which is, was what was necessary to eat up that difference that we were falling short by in the beginning. So we have our revised pricing. We can go on to the next page, and it's just a quick survey that we certainly would appreciate if you answered a few short questions. All this data and all this information is completely anonymous and kept, we only report it in terms of averages and groups, not by individuals. But if you do enter your email address and answer the couple more questions, it will send you an email with your revised pricing. It'll look like this. And it will also give you a price list, which you can open as a PDF. And it will actually, I didn't enter a farm name, but it would say your farm name on the price list. These are your revised prices, and then the date that you updated it on. So you could actually, if you had, If you're doing sales by the cut out of a freezer in your barn, or even maybe on the table at the farmer's market, you have this handy price list available. So that's how the tool works. There is a way to use it for pricing carcasses. The process is much simpler because you don't need the weights of every single cut, and otherwise it's very, very similar. So that's it for the demonstration of the Cornell meat price and yield calculator. Now that we've developed our pricing and used the tool, I want to address some of the ways that the tool is really helpful and call that what's the point. Well, the point of developing a price on the pricing tool is to make sure that with each animal that you sell in each channel, that you are realizing a profit. It's also a way to test and adjust your current pricing in the channels that you use. It's a way to account for and value your labor. Not that you're literally going to be writing yourself a paycheck, but you do need to account for labor when comparing opportunities and put a value on it. It's also a way to manage inventory of cuts. As we discussed, you can hopefully speed up the sales of high volume, slow moving cuts, and maybe even slow down the sales of those things that you usually sell right out of. It's also a way to evaluate new opportunities and set prices to see if they're going to work out. You can also use the tool to help a wholesale buyer, for example, a grocery store or restaurant that wants to start buying animals by the side or the whole. You can actually supply them with the numbers that you've got from your farm and let them walk through the tool so that they can see how they'll be needing to price out the meat. And finally, it's really just to develop channel-specific pricing that always works for the farm. And what does it mean if you develop pricing using this tool, but that and then you determine that your customers in that channel would, quote, never pay those prices? Well, it certainly comes up. People will go in here and start using the tool and realize that the kind of prices they need in order for them to make money are higher than they expected, and they're worried that their customers would never pay those prices. Well, that means a few different things for the farm. First of all, it might mean that you're not valuing your time and that you're possibly selling all of this meat at a loss. At the very least, you're falling short of your income goals. It might mean that you're just in the wrong channel. If you've got a restaurant customer who would never pay those prices, you're selling to the wrong kind of restaurant, and you might be at the wrong farmer's market. It means that you need to incorporate channel selection and market research in order that you can find the customers who already value what you produce. You may be targeting the wrong folks with that product. It means that you need to apply more marketing technique and better skills in order to command the price that you need, which is certainly possible. It might also mean that you're undercutting the rest of the market. Other farms around you are commanding higher prices because they worked out their real costs. You could be hurting the market for local meat by selling it to a too low a price. If we think about it, the difference between $4 a pound and $8 a pound ground beef is in the marketing. I mean, of course, it has to do with the quality, but it really has to do with applied marketing management. That is, understanding your target market, having developed a marketing strategy, doing some market research and being sure that you're in a whole marketing position, which we talked about in section 3, developing your marketing budget, having a communication plan, and putting the time in to market effectively and to get those better prices. So really, in the marketplace, the higher prices are available to us, but they don't come without putting in the time as well. That's the big difference. It's very much like production-based decisions. So I did a research project for 6 years on the factors that influence the price of feeder calves at auction. And what we found is that the difference between low-priced calves and high-priced calves is applied management. In this case, it's production management, and we know the factors that buyers will pay for. Well, the very same idea applies to marketing. If you apply your marketing management, you bring in skill, and you put in the time, you can receive higher prices. To successfully use the price calculator tool, you do need to prepare in advance. and set aside the time to do it right, to do it well. You should estimate your cost of production as accurately as possible. You can work with extension in order to get help and come up with a realistic cost of production. And for those people that have already used the tool, often the biggest weakness that I see in their final pricing is because they started with an artificially low cost of production. So spend some time working on that cost of production and reach out to extension for help with that if you need to. Then you need to decide the production profit per head that you'd like to receive above your cost so that your production business is better than break even. To get an accurate estimate of your marketing time, this might include keeping a log of your time for a couple of weeks and seeing how much you invest in each channel. Then you'll need to get the carcass data from one animal, or if you keep lots of records, then the average from a group, but probably just choose one average animal, not the best one in your herd or flock, and not the worst, just an average animal, and get that carcass weight, and then bring all the meat back from that and weigh out all those cuts so that you know all the weights to enter in the calculator. I'll just say that over. You'll need all of the data from one average animal from your herd or flock. So that is the carcass weight, and then bringing home all the meat from that single animal and weighing out the cuts. So you have the names of the cuts and the weights to enter into the calculator. It's helpful also to keep your processor's invoice so you know how much you paid for a kill fee and cut and wrap and any additional processing. Often the processing invoice will also show your carcass weight. Keep track of your trucking time and money spent on things like fuel, and then have your list of the prices that you're currently using in that channel. So all of these things, you really need to get them gathered together in advance in order to have a good use of the tool. And that might mean that you have to wait until you send the next batch of animals for processing before you're able to use the tool. Going in and using made up numbers or estimates is really not satisfying, and most users that start using fake numbers wind up quitting before they're done using the tool. So that's just some helpful advice for successful use. Okay, that's the end of that. That's what I was trying to think. At the most 20 to 25 minutes. Okay.